Good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Wednesday, August 23rd, 2023. And our top story today, educating board members so they can fulfill their fiduciary responsibilities to plan members. Joining me now to discuss this and a lot more, Marcie Frost is the Chief Executive Officer for CalPERS. Marcie, great to see you again. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Yeah, it's great to see you again, Jeff.
And Marcie, I want to start off just talking about generally the CalPERS retirement portfolio. Do you want to share kind of where the portfolio is? We've got a lot of inflation, a lot of headwinds, kind of balancing the market with bulls and bears. How do you see it at CalPERS?
Well, we're right at that midpoint of our 4-year asset liability review, and that will be a session that we'll take the board through in November. But remember, 2 years ago, we did make some changes to the portfolio. We had upped the assets in more of the private markets. That would include private equity and private credit. And our private credit, even though we only had half of that 5% allocated at the time the returns were announced at the end of June, the team, a very small but mighty team, was able to get about half that into play, and it pretty significantly outperformed its benchmark. So that's been a really good news story, even though it's a relatively smaller portion of the portfolio. The other part is moving, private equity and looking at private equity, a little bit differently and having more diversification there, not just in the fund of funds, but how can we do more co-investments? How do we get, access to some of the smaller managers, which I'll talk a little bit more about, our Catalyst, our Mosaic platform, as we're trying to build new entrepreneurs to get to that next level where an institutional investor like CalPERS or the size of CalPERS can do that more directly. And so I think those have done well. The public equity side, the public market side, we do have some drawdown risk protection still in public equity as well as fixed income. That did have a drag, an intentional, drag on returns. What we've always said is that the downside risk is going to hurt us more than the upside is going to help us. But, in November, I think it will be very important. I've got pretty significant turnover on our board, and they're all in their onboarding and learning. And so we just need to go back to the building blocks with our board and explain, not only the strategic asset allocation that we put in place 2 years ago, but also this drawdown risk protection and how it's performed since inception. So I think that will be a really good opportunity for this board to make some important decisions moving forward.
And Marcie, I want to talk a little bit about you mentioned there's some turnover. Can you talk a little bit about board education? I think a lot of public plan sponsors watching, and also people maybe not understanding what goes into managing such a large portfolio, because it's not just Marcie Frost making the decisions. There's a group of people, and then there are people who have similar to a fiduciary responsibility for the plan.
Right. Yeah. So every one of our 13 board members, and we actually have a vacancy on the board at this point in time. So there's 12, but all of them carry that very significant fiduciary responsibility. Every decision made for the exclusive benefit of being able to pay our members, our retirees. And so just a bit of an anecdote, I am coming up on my 7th year, if you can believe that, as a CEO at CalPERS in October.
Bravo.
Thank you. And there is one remaining board member who actually hired me, and that is the current board president, Teresa Taylor. And so just kind of a variety of reasons for that turnover. We run member elections, and every now and then, someone who wanted to run again for a 4-year term was not successful, and we've got a new board member coming in. We have, a new state controller and a newer state treasurer. So it's typically through member elections. We have a couple newer governor appointees. It's the insurance representative that the governor appoints, which is vacant. And so onboarding and that board education cycle is really very important to the board. It's really important to the team, and really drives the way that we interact with one another. How is appropriate governance? What is the role of the board? What's the role of the team? The board has given the team and I think from a good governance standpoint, a lot of delegated authority, which includes, running the investment deals, approving the investment deals. But when you have that level of delegated authority, you really have to up your transparency. You have to be able to explain to the board on a regular basis through a variety of channels how that delegation is being used. So deal flow, for example, one of the things that they're very interested in is private equity deal flow. What are we looking at? What does venture look like? So we're, talking about funding more venture. This Mosaic platform, are we finding the diverse entrepreneurs that we really set out to find through TPG and through Grosvenor relationships? So we have tried to find a variety of ways, again, to make sure that they are informed. But I must acknowledge that I'm still trying to learn what this board's preferences are, and then we probably need to recalibrate some of that data, some of that information for them. So we try to do a combination of external sessions, external onboarding sessions, as well as internal sessions with the team. So before someone even gets into their first board meeting, they're getting their fiduciary training with our general counsel and their outside fiduciary counsel. And then we run into, meeting directly with the investment office, directly with the health plans, meeting directly with the operational side of the house to understand really the significant policies that have been approved over time and just being able to answer their questions. But I remember this. I was a trustee in Washington, and it takes some time until you feel pretty comfortable that you understand not only the decisions that have been made, but also what your role is and how can you best contribute based on your own experience. So we're right in the midst of that. They're getting ready to go into another self-assessment. And in January, we will get the results of that self-assessment. And I think likely onboarding will come up again. It's come up in the past. And some succession, which I'll be running the board through. Just, everyone's looking at succession because I think if the pandemic taught us anything, there was a bit of a severing of the relationship between employees and their employer, and people are much more mobile and portable than they ever have been. So we really have to be thinking about how do we develop our own talent? How do we develop our own team so those opportunities exist for the team?
Yeah, and Marcie, you have a very deep investment team. A lot of knowledge there, but you also, not you personally, but CalPERS leverages independent outside consultants that act in a fiduciary purview in terms of providing benefit. How do you use consultants? I think a lot of folks might have an interest in that. So you've got this board, they've got the fiduciary, if you will, responsibility. You've got a team of making investment decisions, bringing it to the board. How do you leverage outside folks to bring you the best ideas and what's happening basically around the world?
Mm-hmm. I think that there are a couple of ways that we do that. The board does have independent consultants who, they get to select, they get to choose. We finished up that RFP process last spring. And so we've got Makita, and then we've got Wilshire as the general investment consultant to the board. And then Makita's got the asset class side of it. But what it really comes down to is those independent consultants having a really good working relationship with the team. The consultants are, typically embedded in the teams where they are sitting at a table when we're looking at due diligence, we're looking at a particular deal and they're giving input there. They're also being able to advise the board if the board has questions on agenda items. And so I think that has worked really well here. And when I was in Washington State and I was the chair of the state investment board there, one of their governance best practices, and I think it really was, is they have 5 independent investment experts on the board. So each of them representing one of the asset classes. And they're sitting up there with the rest of the board who has voting authority. These 5 did not have voting authority, but they were there really to be part of that group, part of that board, and be able to advise the board members, especially board members who are trying to get up to speed pretty quickly. These are lay boards, typically don't come out of the investment industry. So having those consultants, having those investment experts, and being able to hear from others outside of your investment team, that's really important, I think, to not just fiduciary responsibility, but also to good governance. And so I think effectively, they're operating in that same manner, although they're not sitting, up on the dais with the CalPERS board.
Yeah, I mean, that's diversification. Talk about diversification with investing, but also diversification in ideas. Marcie, I need to take a very quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about a third-party data breach. How do you manage through that? You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network. Welcome back. We're joined this morning by Marcie Frost. She's the Chief Executive Officer for CalPERS. Marcie, thanks so much for staying with us. Really appreciate you hanging around for segment number 2 this morning.
You got it. Anything for you, Jeff.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Marcie, let's talk about this third-party breach, and I want to, you know, there's been a lot out in the press and the media about it, so I think people are aware about it. But I want to talk more about your management, not you particularly, but CalPERS management of a data breach. Organizations like yours, Marcie, are under a lot of threat in terms of data. You manage a lot of data, so security is going to be really important.
Yeah. Yes. And, you know, you think about the increased threat landscape that you mentioned, that it's just a matter of time. It's not when, you know, it's not if, it's when. And, you know, unfortunately, the when happened through a third party that we use for member death identification. And the reason that, you know, these pension plans, and not just CalPERS, and you've seen some of this coverage throughout this particular breach, you know, it's very difficult to identify to make sure that you're paying people that should be paid. And so notification of a member's death is not always done, you know, quickly and responsively to the pension fund. And so that runs the scenario where you have overpayments, very difficult to collect those overpayments. And so just to give you a bit of a statistic, we'd only been with the vendor since February of 2022. And from February 2022 to May of 2023, there were 26,000 deaths in our member population, our retiree population. We were not made aware of 11,000 of those deaths. Those all came through this particular vendor. So the vendor relationship and the business reason why CalPERS entered into contract was still a very sound reason to do so. But unfortunately, you know, there's some bad actors out there, and they were able to compromise this tool, this Move It tool. And so, you know, for us, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
And so for us, knowing that, you know, 769,000 retirees were going to be, you know, notified by us that the data breach had happened, we worked very quickly to get that information out. You know, but one of the things we have to be really cautious about is that we don't amplify a problem. We needed to spend a bit of time investigating what had happened. Was our data really part of the breach? Why? And do our own, identification and verification of it. But once we were certain that it happened, we notified those 769,000 members. And what I told the team is that, what we will be genuinely assessed on is how responsive we are to the members and how respectful we are throughout this entire process of engagement, knowing that this is a highly anxious time, that people are really afraid of this. And so every decision that we made was, well, what would the members want in this case? How do we make sure that we satisfy their expectations? So as we're standing up contact centers, we were really careful about service level agreements. We didn't want anyone waiting on the phone for longer than 10 minutes. So we had times where we had to up the resources at the Experian Contact Center, including our own contact center, who was doing kind of the overflow of calls. And, we did find that spiked from time to time. And at one point we had added 50 resources to that. And we've done some webinars. We've sat down with retiree groups and really tried to explain, to the extent that we can. There's certain information, of course, in these kinds of incidents that we can't talk about, but we always wanted to be accessible, and what we can talk about, we will. What we can't talk about, we'll certainly tell you that as well. So, I think, with a really, really unfortunate situation, we really tried to stay focused on what would our members really need and what would they want.
Yeah, and this is, just to be clear, this is not unique to the retirement or the benefits or the healthcare industry. I mean, this is happening across the planet. And I would add to your initial thought is, people want to know that you're dealing with the issue and that you're doing your best to resolve it so the same issue doesn't happen again. I think people are really understand that stuff is going to break from time to time. It's kind of how you respond. You talked about the response, Marcie, and I just want to kind of go back to something you said, which is you want to balance what you communicate, because you don't want to give TMI, you don't want to give too much information, because that opens it up to other bad actors. And by the way, it's not only bad actors, individuals or groups, it's sovereign states that are acting in a bad interest. And having the largest pension fund, at least in the United States, I think you guys are in the top 10, maybe you're at the top. I mean, that puts you square in the target a lot of these bad actors.
Well, definitely. Yeah. I think we found that just because of the financial nature of what we do, the value of the information that we hold on the behalf of our members, those are very high value targets, right? So, and just to be clear, this was not a breach of any CalPERS system. It, really did happen with this vendor that we use for notifying us of members' deaths. But this was a very large breach. It wasn't certainly just CalPERS. It wasn't just the pension industry, as you mentioned. It happened in the financial sector. It happened in the insurance sector. And so, it doesn't really provide us that much relief to have to, talk to our retirees. But what has been really confusing, and I think why we've seen a bit of this volatility in the number of calls and call duration coming in, is as a new entity identifies that they are also impacted by it, they're sending out a notice to retirees who may bank at this particular bank or have an insurance product at this particular company, and they're getting another notice. And so they think that CalPERS has had a second issue, and that's just not the case. It's so widespread that one of our retirees may get 2 to 3 notices that certain information has been compromised or consumed by these bad actors.
Yeah, and how do you? Last question, I promise I'll let you go. In terms of clarity of message, I want to just talk about that, because you got to have the leadership to guide an organization, the team through. You're interacting. People get interacted with through your customer contact center, call center, however you phrase it. They're going to go to the website. They're going to, unfortunately, maybe go to social media, 8,000 different platforms, and they're going to get some bad information. How do you tailor the message? I mean, you got a team around you, but how do you tailor that message? That's got to be challenging because there's so many moving parts.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, we were very thoughtful from the beginning about how do we talk about this event? How do we really put ourselves in the position of this retiree and be able to provide as much information as we possibly could. So, we have FAQs on our website, and those FAQs have been updated based on questions that have come in that we did not anticipate. And those got updated very, very quickly. They received a direct letter, and in that letter, all of the FAQs were also that we had, collected prior to this were also in that letter. The letter ended up being a bit long, but we were happy to do that because we knew that the retirees in our case tend to like paper more than they like electronic communication. So we put as much in that initial, communication, that initial information as we possibly could. And I think the other part is just staying close to the stakeholder groups, the retiree groups. We did meet with them in advance of doing more of our public notification of this vendor breach, and then just being available through town hall meetings or whatever they would like us to attend. We are happy to do so. And, we have this relationship with our members, our contact center, our customer service data with the over 2 million members we have at CalPERS is extremely high. We have over a 95% customer approval rating. And so we have this relationship, and they have this expectation about the way that we serve them, how responsive we are, that we're respectful with them, we give them accurate information. And so it was a little bit surprising, I think, to Experian when they were trying to anticipate the number of contact center agents, is they used the data that they had more in the public sector, right? So you have a company that had a breach and it affected a customer base, and that customer base doesn't have the same relationship with the company as a retiree does with CalPERS. So call volumes were up. We offered 2 years of credit, free credit monitoring. I think the typical is a year, but we think 2 years is right. We got some advice that typically, 2 years seems to be around the right amount of time where if the data is going to be used, that's when it's going to be used within that 2-year period of time. And so we've got a 20% take-up rate on that, which is 3 times the average in that public company to customer scenario that I mentioned. And so we'd like to see that 20% come up even more, and we're identifying some ways that we might be able to get that to increase by the end of September.
Yeah, really a quick response, a thoughtful response. Marcie, we're going to have to leave it there. There's so much I would love to talk to you about, but maybe you'll come back on the program again.
Back.
Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
And that wraps up this episode of BRNAM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to? Drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the latest curated news and lifestyle, wellness, finance, tech, aging, so much more, all in one place, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. Want to search our archives, check out our latest content? Visit our website. We're back again tomorrow with another great episode of BRN AM. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe. Keep on saving. Don't forget, roll with the changes. Now is your opportunity to co-create content around any topic on the First Lifestyle and Wellness Network. Reach a global audience through our platform and co-own exclusive branded content. All of our programs are available on demand and also as audio-only podcasts, so you can take us on the go. Broadcast Retirement Network, available anytime, anywhere, and on any device.